concern for the Constitution. I am greatly saddened by this, and I hope the President will reverse course. I hope the majority party in the Senate will stand up for the Constitution, but I'm greatly disappointed in where we are in this debate. Thank you, and I yield back my time.
Senator from Nevada.
Later today, Mr. President, the debate will center on the fundamental question of whether members of Congress should be responsible for upholding the same laws as the American people. Mr. President, the unified answer from this Congress must be an unequivocal yes. It's no secret that Congress has a track record of exempting themselves from the very laws it writes. Former Senator John Glenn said, "Such exemptions are the rankest form of hypocrisy. Laws that are good enough for everyone else ought to be good enough for us." Former Congressman Henry Hyde once quipped that Congress would exempt itself from the laws of gravity if it could. I have long supported efforts to ensure that Congress refuses to give in to any temptation to exempt itself. When I was serving in the U.S. House of Representatives, I was proud to be a leader in the effort to require members of Congress and their staffs be subject to the same requirements that the Obama health care bill put on all citizens. While the bad old days of Congress exempting itself from major occupational safety and health and fair labor standard laws were done away with to some extent after passage of the Congressional Accountability Act and other reforms in the mid-90s, Congress should not miss this opportunity to show the American people that it's willing to live by the very rules that are imposed on the American people. The people of this nation are tired of business as usual here in Washington. They are tired of the congressional exemptions or carve-outs that create a chasm between the working class and the political class. My home state of Nevada is currently enduring the highest unemployment rate in the country. In fact, Nevada has led the nation in unemployment for more than 2 years. And as I travel the state, I hear from individuals who are frustrated because of public servants who are supposed to be representing them don't feel their pain. While our economy limps on, the nation's capital remains untouched by the difficulties Nevadans experience every day. In light of these facts, is it really any mystery why Congress is currently experiencing its worst approval ratings in history? I'm a co-sponsor of the Stock Act because I believe confidential information acquired as a result of holding public office should not be used for private gain. The Stock Act would prohibit members or employees of Congress and the executive branch employees from profiting from non-public information obtained because of their status and requires greater oversight of the growing political intelligence industry. Members and employees should also be required to report the purchases, sales, and exchange of any stock, bond, or commodity transaction greater than $1,000 every 30 days. As a strong supporter of transparency in Congress and the federal government, I believe the Stock Act is an important step for Congress to take and start earning back the trust and faith of the American people. Restoring that confidence will surely be a long journey because public servants have in too many cases not taken their job seriously. But through legislation like the Stock Act, we send an important message to the citizens of this nation that we understand our position requires us to uphold the highest ethical and moral standards, and we are willing to undergo the scrutiny required to regain that trust. Members of Congress should follow the same rules as every other American. No American can trade on insider information without the risk of prosecution, and Congress should be held to the same standard. Congress should be held to the same standard. Elected officials should take every precaution to ensure that they do not use public information for personal gain. I hope both chambers will take the time to thoughtfully consider this legislation, send it to the President for his signature. My hope is that the American people will view passage of this legislation as an earnest, bipartisan effort to change the way Washington does business. Mr. President, I appreciate the opportunity to discuss this important bill, and I yield the floor. Suggest the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
Mr. President,
Senator from Utah.
I ask unanimous consent that the quorum call be suspended.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I rise today to talk about the state of the nation's economy. Upon taking office, President Obama encountered one of the worst recessions in this country's history. He faced tremendous challenges under any standard. To be sure, it would have been difficult for any president to make the kinds of reforms that would have had an immediate effect on an economy this bad. But at the end of the day, we see that although he was handed something that we can barely characterize as an economic emergency, he, through his actions and through his policies, turned that emergency into a national tragedy. In his first 2 years, instead of focusing on creating jobs and creating a set of circumstances in which the private sector could bring jobs to fruition, President Obama and his substantial majorities in both houses of Congress used their tremendous advantage to push for greater government control over Americans' health care choices, more burdensome and debilitating regulations on businesses, and a failed stimulus package that led to record-setting annual deficits. Just look at America before President Obama took office and compare it to our economic situation now. For example, unemployment is up 9% from when President Obama took office. The price of gasoline is up 83% compared to when he took office. Long-term unemployment is up 107%. The median value of a single-family home in America is down 14%, and the U.S. national debt is up 43%. He's added over $4 trillion to our national debt. Then last year, President Obama created a standoff with Republicans by refusing to accept a reasonable compromise on spending reforms as a condition for raising the nation's debt ceiling. He presided over the downgrading of America's credit rating, the first in our country's history. And he's taken every opportunity to block the development of America's energy resources, a source of much-needed revenue and jobs. Perhaps most troubling, this president has intentionally divided the country by waging vicious class warfare campaigns, separating average, hardworking Americans by income and then pitting them against one another. The president's record on this score has been repugnant and damaging. Instead of working with Congress to address our genuine economic challenges, the president has responded by starting his re-election campaign early. In a series of taxpayer-funded campaign stops, the president sharpened his divisive message and astoundingly blamed Republicans for legislative gridlock. Never mind that the president's most recent budget proposal failed to attract even a single vote in the United States Senate. And it was, in fact, Senate Democrats who refused to bring the president's own jobs plan to the floor for a vote. Even today, members of the president's own party are lining up against him to oppose his tone-deaf decision on the Keystone XL pipeline. This project would create 20,000 American jobs. It would inject much-needed private sector capital into our economy, and it would increase the country's energy security. But the president has chosen to block the project as an election year nod to his friends in the extreme left wing of the environmentalist movement. President Obama has put the state of our union in disarray. Certainly, he inherited a poor economy. But the decisions he has made and implemented since taking office are making it worse. He was handed an economic emergency, and instead of taking the challenge head on, he chose to ignore it. And then he turned it into a national tragedy. There is a void of leadership in the White House. He must end the divisiveness and start dealing directly and decisively with the needs of the country. The president has very little time left to show the American people that he can be the kind of leader who will put the country before his own personal political interests. For the sake of all Americans, I sincerely hope that he uses that time wisely. Thank you, Mr. President.
Mr. President.
Senator from Maine.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I rise today to introduce legislation aimed at ensuring that the health of American travelers is not placed at possible risk as our airport security technology evolves. I'm very pleased to be joined by Senators Sakaka, Coburn, Scott Brown, and Levin, who are co-sponsoring this bill. Our bill has two major components. First, it would require the Department of Homeland Security's Science and Technology Directorate, in consultation with the National Science Foundation, to commission an independent study on the possible health effects of the X-ray radiation emitted by some of the scanning machines we see and pass through at our airports. And second, it would give airline passengers, especially those passengers in sensitive groups, such as pregnant women, clear notice of their ability to choose another screening option in lieu of exposure to ionizing radiation. Some advanced imaging technology, or AIT machines, rely on X-ray backscatter technology. Time and time again, I have expressed my concern over their use, particularly since there is an alternative screening technology available. While the TSA has repeatedly told the public that the amount of radiation emitted from these machines is extremely small, passengers and some scientific experts have raised legitimate questions about the impact of repeated exposure to this radiation. Last November, during a hearing on aviation security before our Homeland Security Committee, the TSA Administrator, John Pistole, agreed to my call for an independent study to address the lingering health concerns and questions about this additional and repeated exposure to radiation. Shortly thereafter, however, he appeared to back away from this commitment, suggesting that a forthcoming report by the Department of Homeland Security's Inspector General might be a sufficient substitute for a new, completely independent, thorough study. Chairman Joe Lieberman and I wrote to the Administrator to press for more details about TSA's plans for an independent study. 2 weeks later, having received no reply, I sent another letter to Administrator Pistole asking why he believed that the IG report on TSA's use of backscatter machines was a sufficient substitute for an independent study of the health impacts. TSA's response lacked any detail as to why the agency no longer believes that an independent study on the health effects of X-ray backscatter machines is warranted, nor did it explain how the IG's review would be a sufficient substitute for an independent study. And that is why, Mr. President, I've introduced this bill today. Late last year, the European Commission announced that in order not to risk jeopardizing citizens' health and safety, it would only authorize the use of passenger scanners in the European Union that do not use X-ray technology. This prohibition gives even more need and justification for an independent study of the safety of the IAT machines. Mr. President, some respected experts have warned Congress and the administration of the potential negative public health risks posed by the X-ray backscatter machines. They note that while the risk that someone might develop cancer because of his or her exposure to radiation during one screening by such an AIT machine is very small, we simply do not truly know the risk of this radiation exposure over multiple screenings for frequent flyers, those in vulnerable groups, or TSA employees themselves who are operating these machines. When a person is scanned by these machines, they receive a dose of radiation, what experts in the field call a direct dose. During the scan, some of the radiation is not absorbed, but is scattered in random directions from the person being scanned. Experts call this the scatter dose. Some experts point to anomalies between the scatter dose reportedly associated with these scanners and the scatter dose associated with comparable medical technology. Specifically, the scatter doses for these AIT machines are higher in relative terms than scatter doses for comparable medical devices. What is troubling, Mr. President, is that the experts are not sure why the AIT scatter doses are higher. They point to possible deficiencies with the testing equipment or the poor placement of the testing equipment as possible explanations. Overall, they say that this anomaly could point to higher direct dose rates and should be yet another impetus for an independent study. Additionally, some experts note that the safety mechanisms in these machines that would prevent them from malfunctioning have never been independently tested. This means that if a machine malfunctions and the safety features designed to shut the machine down in such an instance do not work, a traveler could receive a higher dose of radiation. Pregnant women, children, the elderly, and as much as 5% of the adult population are more sensitive to radiation exposure. At a minimum, this suggests the need for further independent study. Mr. President, I want to share with my colleagues a tragic episode involving the daughter of two of my constituents. She underwent screening at the airport with a backscatter X-ray AIT. She was pregnant and directed by TSA to a line for the backscatter X-ray machine. She was completely unaware that she was entering into an X-ray emitting machine before she stepped into it. She thought it was the more traditional magnetometer. Afterwards, she was distressed to know that she had exposed her unborn child to X-ray radiation. Had she realized ahead of time, she clearly would have opted for the alternative screening methods. Only 2 weeks later, she suffered a miscarriage, which she attributes to the radiation she received from the scan. Now, Mr. President, we will never know for certain the cause of this family's loss, but they believe in their hearts the backscatter radiation is to blame. Clearly, at a minimum, this young woman should have been informed by a prominent sign that an alternative means of screening was available. And that's why my bill also requires TSA to have larger, understandable signs at the beginning of the screening process, not later when it is only noticed, if at all, after a lengthy wait in line. Signs should alert passengers that pregnant women, children, and the elderly can be more sensitive to radiation exposure. These signs should also make clear that passengers can opt out of this type of scanning. I have urged TSA to move forward using only radiation screening technology. But in the meantime, an independent study is needed to protect the public and to determine which technology is worthy of taxpayer dollars. Surely, passengers should be well informed of their screening options. We Americans have demonstrated our willingness to endure enhanced security measures at our airports if those measures appear to be reasonable and related to real risks. But travelers become frustrated when security measures inconvenience them without cause privacy or health concerns, or when they appear to be focused on those who pose little or no threat. On this particular issue, Senators Akaka, Coburn, Scott Brown, Levin, and I agree that we are past the time when an independent review of the scanning technology that emits radiation must be undertaken. I urge my colleagues to join us in quickly passing this legislation. Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I would suggest the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
President.
Majority Leader.
I ask consent to call the quorum be terminated.
Without objection.
I have 5 unanimous consent requests for committees to meet during today's session. They have the approval of both majority and minority leaders. I ask consent that these requests be agreed to and the requests be printed in the record.
Is there objection? Hearing none, so ordered.
It's
Morning business is closed on the previous order. The Senate will resume consideration of the motion to proceed to S-2038, which the clerk will report.
A motion to proceed to the consideration of S-2038, an original bill to prohibit members of Congress from using non-public information derived from their official positions for personal benefit and for other purposes.
The question is on the motion to proceed to S-2038. All in favor say aye.
aye.
Opposed, nay. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. The motion is agreed to.
I at this time.
The clerk will report the bill.
Okay.
Calendar number 301, S-2038, a bill to prohibit members of Congress and employees of Congress from using non-public information derived from their official positions for personal benefit and for other purposes.
Mr. President, I have a substitute amendment at the desk.
Clerk will report.
The Senator from Nevada, Mr. Reed, for himself and others, proposes an amendment numbered 1470. Strike all after the enacting clause.
Further reading of the amendment be waived.
Objection.
On behalf of Senator Lieberman, I call up amendment which is at the desk.
Clerk will report.
The Senator from Nevada, Mr. Reed, for Mr. Lieberman, proposes an amendment numbered 1482 to amendment number 1470. On page 7, line 22, after reform, insert, and the Committee on the Judiciary.
Without objection. Senator from Ohio.
I thank the presiding officer. Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that the pending amendments be set aside.
Without objection.
I ask unanimous consent to call up Amendment 1478.
Is there objection? If none, so ordered.
I ask
Clerk will report.
I ask unanimous consent the reading of Amendment 1478 be dispensed with.
The clerk will report the amendment by number.
Senator from Ohio, Mr. Brown, proposes an amendment numbered 1478 to amendment number 1470.
I ask unanimous consent the amendment be dispensed with the reading.
Without objection.
And, Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent the pending amendment be set aside.
Is there objection? Hearing none, so ordered.
I ask unanimous consent to call up my Amendment 1481.
The clerk will report.
The senator from Ohio, Mr. Brown, for himself and Mr. Merkley, proposes an amendment numbered 1481 to amendment number 1470. At the appropriate place, insert the following. Section.
President, I ask unanimous consent that the reading of the amendment be dispensed with.
Without objection.
Mr. President.
The senator from Maine.
Mr. President, I thought we had a tentative informal agreement that we were going to go back and forth, alternating to make amendments pending, and that we would do one from the Democratic side, then one from the Republican side, and go back and forth. Is there...
I'm fine.
Senator from Ohio.
Mr. President, I appreciate the comments from the senator from Maine. I was just asking that they be offered. I was going to speak on them together, but I'm certainly willing for a Republican to go next, and then I speak about my two amendments together, Mr. President. Whatever the senator from Maine would like.
Thank you.
Senator from Maine.
Mr. President, I would then ask unanimous consent that we proceed with amendments so that we do alternate from side to side, since there are a number of amendments that have been filed, and I think that would be the fairest way to proceed to make them pending.
Is there objection? Hearing none, so ordered.
President.
The senator from Pennsylvania.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent to set aside the pending amendments.
Without objection.
And I would like to ask unanimous consent to call up Amendment 1472, my amendment with Senator McCaskill.
Clerk will report.
The senator from Pennsylvania, Mr. Toomey, for himself and others, proposes amendment number 1472.
Without objection.
Dispense with the reading. Mr. President, I'd like to make some comments about this amendment, but I will do it at a later time when time is more available. I just want to thank my colleague from Maine and my colleague from Ohio for their helpful cooperation in this process.
The senator from Ohio.
Both from Pennsylvania and Maine. I'd like to discuss for a moment detail about, we'll do more detail about the amendments later. I want to say a few words about each of them. They're consistent, first, with the spirit of the underlying bill, a version which I co-sponsored. I'm particularly appreciative of Senator Gillibrand for her good work on this overall issue. The underlying Stock Act clarifies that insider trading laws apply the same way to members of Congress as they do to the rest of the country. Pure and simple, it makes sense. My amendments would also extend generally applicable laws to members of Congress. One amendment would apply financial trade disclosure rules to members in the same way that they apply to others, such as corporate insiders, financial advisors, SEC employees. It would narrow the window from disclosure from 30 days down to 10 days. It would make member disclosure more consistent with rules that require timely disclosure of transactions by corporate directors, officers, and large shareholders. We should do the same more strictly than we have in the past, to do the same as they do. Let's hold ourselves to the same standard of openness and shine the light of transparency on our financial trades if we make them. The Second Amendment, Mr. President, would extend to senators the same conflict of interest rules that currently apply to committee staff and executive branch officials. This amendment, which is number 1481, is co-authored by Senator Merkley of Oregon. Members of the Senate and staff would be prohibited from owning or short-selling individual stock in companies affected by their official duties. We would still be permitted to invest in broad-based funds or place our assets in blind trusts as permitted by the Select Armed Services Committee, the SAS rule, and federal obligations. When asked about the fact that the SAS conflict of interest rules apply to staff and DOD appointees, President George W. Bush's Deputy Secretary of Defense, Gordon England, said, "I think Congress should live by the rules they impose on other people." That's why I'm offering these two amendments. It's pretty simple, Mr. President. We vote on a whole range of very important issues in this country. We should not only not benefit from our votes in investments that we might have, But it's important that the perception be that when we make decisions, we make them for the good of the country, not for our own financial interests. That's something the public finds pretty distasteful. These two amendments together will help fix that. Mr. President, I yield the floor.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
Well, it's been general speeches in the Senate this morning. Moments ago, senators approved by voice vote to proceed to debate on a bill banning insider trading by congressional lawmakers. It's commonly being referred to as the Stock Act. At 12:30, we expect the Senate to recess for their weekly party caucus lunches. They'll be back at 2:15 for more general speeches, and we'll, of course, continue with live coverage of the Senate when they return here on C-SPAN 2. The Senate also today said goodbye to their parliamentarian. Alan Fruman served as parliamentarian since 1987, took a break in 1995, and then returned in 2001. He's being replaced by Elizabeth McDonough. The Senate making history today by announcing the first woman to hold that post since it was created in 1935.
Mr. President.
Senator from Massachusetts.
Thank you. I ask unanimous consent that the quorum call be dispensed with.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. President. Just want to, now that we're starting to get the intake of amendments, I want to reiterate what we talked about yesterday about having relevant amendments filed. This is a very specific issue that we're addressing, which is to deal with perceived insider trading and or members of Congress having an unfair advantage in having obviously non-public information, confidential information that would ultimately be used for financial gain. As we're reviewing some of the amendments coming in or hearing discussions of others that may be forthcoming, I want to remind the members that this is something that forces outside this building may not want to have happen. And I feel very strongly that it's something we need to do and use to reestablish the trust with the American citizens and members of Congress. That being said, as our members are listening or their staffs are proposing amendments that are forthcoming, I would hope that they would be relevant to the issue at hand and not get sidetracked into a discussion that will take us away from what we're trying to do here today. So I'm, once again, looking forward to the amendments. I know that Senator Lieberman, Gillibrand, Collins, and I will be managing the floor today to try to make sure that happens and convince our members to just stay focused on this very important issue. So thank you, and I thank the President and yield the floor and suggest the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
Mr. President.
Senator from South Dakota.
Mr. President, I would ask unanimous consent that the quorum call be set aside.
Without objection.
I would ask unanimous consent to set aside the pending amendment.
Without objection.
And I ask unanimous consent to call up amendment number 1477.
The clerk will report.
Senator from South Dakota, Mr. Thune, proposes an amendment numbered 1477.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that the reading of the amendment be dispensed with.
Without objection.
Mr. President, this amendment would make it easier for small businesses to better access capital in order to expand and create jobs. On November the 3rd in 2011, the House of Representatives passed a companion measure which was introduced by Representative Kevin McCarthy on a near unanimous vote of 413 to 11. 175 Democrats in the House supported this legislation. We have an opportunity here, Mr. President, to show the American people that we are serious about creating jobs and to pass this amendment here in the United States Senate. This bill would remove a regulatory roadblock. I should say this amendment would remove a regulatory roadblock in order to make it easier for small businesses to access needed capital to expand and create jobs. Current SEC registration exemption rules severely hamper the ability of small businesses to raise capital by allowing them to raise capital only from investors with whom they have a pre-existing relationship. By modernizing this rule, small businesses and startups would be able to more easily raise capital from accredited investors nationwide. According to the Small Business and Entrepreneurship Council, and I quote, "This is a long overdue solution that will widen the pool of potential funders for entrepreneurs. Our economy will improve once entrepreneurs are provided the tools, opportunities, and incentives that they need to hire and invest," end quote. Earlier this month, the SEC Small Advisory Committee on Small and Emerging Companies recommended that the agency, and I quote again, relax or modify the general solicitation prohibition as a good policy to increase the amount of capital available to small businesses. In his State of the Union address last week, President Obama called on Congress to pass legislation that will help startups and small businesses access capital in order to expand and create jobs. The President said, and I quote, "Most new jobs are created in startups and small businesses, so let's pass an agenda that helps them succeed. Tear down regulations that prevent entrepreneurs from getting the financing to grow. Both parties agree on these ideas, so let's put them in a bill and get it on my desk this year," end quote. Mr. President, this is exactly what this amendment would do. and it has support from investors and entrepreneurs alike. When you've got unemployment hovering around 9%, we need to pass legislation that will enable our job creators to expand and create jobs. As I said, Mr. President, this legislation received overwhelming bipartisan support in the House of Representatives. I hope that we can do the same here in the United States Senate by passing this amendment. Mr. President, we all talk about the importance of making it easier, making it less costly, less difficult for our small businesses and our entrepreneurs to get access to capital so that they can create jobs and get the economy growing again. And so many times these are contentious, controversial differences of opinion about how best to do that. We fight over regulations, we fight over taxes. This is something where there is broad bipartisan support, almost unanimous support in the House of Representatives, a vote of 413 to 11 in support of this legislation when it was voted on in the House of Representatives. And so we have an opportunity here to do something that's very straightforward, that is broadly supported by both Democrats and Republicans, at least it was in the House of Representatives, that the President has suggested we ought to be working on, looking for these types of approaches to freeing up access to capital for our small businesses. You've got the folks out there in the business community overwhelmingly supportive of doing away with the regulatory barrier, the regulatory obstacle that this particular regulation represents in terms of access to capital for our small businesses. So it just seems like one of those things on which there should be no disagreement, and I hope that will be the case. I hope that we can get a vote on this amendment and get this put into law and put into effect so that our small businesses and our entrepreneurs in this country can do what they do best, and that is create jobs. But they've got to have access to capital in order to do that. This makes that process easier, does away with some of these unnecessary regulations and roadblocks and barriers that exist today. So, Mr. President, I hope that my colleagues here in the Senate will support this amendment, and I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Senator from Maine.
Mr. President, earlier we agreed to alternate side to side for the offering of amendments. However, I would say to the Democratic floor manager that there don't appear to be any Democrats right now who are seeking recognition. Therefore, I would ask that the senator from Arizona be permitted to proceed at this time, given the absence of a Democrat on the floor.
Without objection, so ordered.
Mr. President.
The senator from Arizona.
Mr. President, I thank both the senator from New York and the senator from Maine for their courtesy. I ask unanimous consent to set aside the pending amendments and call up amendment number 1471.
Without objection, the clerk will report.
Senator from Arizona, Mr. McCain, for himself and others, proposes an amendment number 1471.
President, I ask unanimous consent that further reading of the amendment be suspended.
Without objection.
Mr. President, this bipartisan amendment is very simple. It would prohibit bonuses for senior executives at Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac while they are in taxpayer-backed conservatorship. I'm joined in this effort by Senators Rockefeller, Enzi, McCaskill, Johans, Barrasso, Blunt, Graham, Coburn, and Thune. Since they're placed in conservatorship in 2008, these two government-sponsored entities have soaked the American taxpayer for nearly $170 billion in bailouts. Recently, Freddie Mac requested an additional $6 billion, and Fannie Mae requested an additional $7.8 billion. That's $13.8 billion more coming out of the pockets of hardworking Americans, many of which are underwater on their mortgages. Now, I'd like to read an article from Politico that back in October titled Fannie and Freddie Bailout Big Bonuses. Federal Housing Finance Agency, the government regulator for Fannie and Freddie, approved $12.7 million in bonus pay after 10 executives from the two government-sponsored corporations last year met modest performance targets tied to modifying mortgages in jeopardy of foreclosure. The executives got the bonuses about 2 years after the federally backed mortgage giants received nearly $170 billion in taxpayer bailouts, and despite pledges by FHFA, the office tasked with keeping them solvent, that it would adjust the level of CEO-level pay after critics slammed huge compensation packages paid out to former Fannie Mae CEO Franklin Raines and others. Securities and Exchange Commission documents show that Ed Haldeman, who announced last week he's stepping down as Freddie Mac CEO, received a base salary of $900,000 last year, yet took home an additional $2.3 million in bonus pay. Records show other Fannie and Freddie executives got similar Wall Street-style compensation packages. Fannie Mae CEO Michael Williams, for example, got $2.37 million in performance bonuses, including Haldeman. The top 5 officers at Freddie banked a combined $6.46 million in performance pay alone last year, though a second bonus installment for $210 is yet to be reported. According to agency records, Williams and others at Fannie pocketed $6.33 million in incentives for what SEC records described as meeting the primary goal of providing liquidity, stability, and affordability. I think it's important to ask the question here, is it really necessary for these bonuses to be provided to these executives when we have men and women who are literally in harm's way who are compensated far less? Is it possible that there aren't some patriotic Americans who would be willing to serve, heading up these organizations to try to get it cleaned up? The primary causes of the collapse of our economy, which still plagues us to this day. For decades, the American taxpayer— Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent the article from Politico be included in the record at this time.
Without objection.
For decades, the American taxpayers have been the victim of outright corruption and blatant abuse at the hands of Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. Countless warnings over the mismanagement of both Fannie and Freddie over the years. In May of 2006, after a 27-month investigation into the corrupt corporate culture and accounting practices at Fannie Mae, the Offices of Federal Housing Enterprise Oversight, the federal regulator charged with overseeing Fannie Mae, issued a blistering 348-page report which stated in part that, and I quote, Fannie Mae senior management promoted an image of the enterprise as one of the lowest risk financial institutions in the world, as, quote, best in class in terms of risk management, financial reporting, internal control, and corporate governance. The findings in this report show that risks at Fannie Mae were greatly understated and that the image was false. During the period covered by that report, Fannie Mae reported extremely smooth profit growth and hit announced targets for earnings per share precisely each quarter. Those achievements were illusions deliberately and systematically created by the enterprise's senior management with the aid of inappropriate accounting and improper earnings management. A large number of Fannie Mae's accounting policies and practices did not comply with generally accepted accounting principles. The enterprise also had serious problems of internal control, financial reporting, and corporate governance. These errors resulted in Fannie Mae overstating reported income and capital by a currently estimated $10.6 billion. By deliberately and intentionally manipulating accounting to hit earnings targets, senior management maximized the bonuses and other executive compensation they received at the expense of the tax shareholders. Earnings management made a significant contribution to the compensation of Fannie Mae Chairman CEO Franklin Raines, which totaled, Franklin Raines' bonus totaled over $90 million from 1998 through 2003. Of that total, over $52 million was directly tied to achieving earnings per share targets, which turned out to be totally false. The list goes on and on. Mr. President, I would recommend to my colleagues, before I go too much further, this book. The title of it is Reckless Endangerment. It's by Gretchen Morgenson, who happens to be a columnist and writer for the New York Times, and Joshua Rosner. It's titled Reckless Endangerment: How Outside Ambition, Greed, and Corruption Led to Economic Armageddon. And I can tell you in this book, it points the finger directly at Fannie and Freddie. And I'd just like to quote one part of it. Because bonuses at Fannie Mae were largely based on per-share earnings growth, it was paramount to keep privates escalating to guarantee bonus payments. And in 1998, top Fannie officials had begun manipulating the company's results by dipping into various profit cookie jars to produce the level of income necessary to generate bonus payments to top management. Federal investigators later found that you could predict what Fannie's earnings per share would be at year's end, almost to the penny, if you knew the maximum earnings per share bonus payout target set by management at the beginning of each year. Between 1998 and 2002, actual earnings in the bonus payout target differed only by a fraction of a cent, the investigators found. Investigators uncovered documents detailing the tactics used by Leanne Spencer, a financial official at Fannie, to make the company's $2.48 per share bonus target. That year, Fannie Mae earned $2.4764 per share. In a mid-November memo to her superiors, Spencer forecast that the company was on track to earn $2.4744 per share, just shy of what was needed to generate maximum bonus payments to executives. She described various ways she could juice the company's profits if needs be. It goes on and on and on. That month, Thomas Nides, Fannie's Executive Vice President for Human Resources, warned a swath of top managers that earnings growth was coming in weak as the year-end approached. You know that as a management group member, you help drive the performance of the company. Nides wrote in a memo, that's why your total compensation is tied to how well Fannie Mae does this year. A memo, in other words, he was jacking them up, telling them that they got to cook the book some more. The memo achieved the desired result. Fannie Mae executives wound up exceeding their target by accounting improperly for low-income housing tax credits the company received. The result, 547 people shared in $27.1 million in bonuses. This was a record. The bonuses represented 0.79% of Fannie Mae's after-tax profits, more than ever before. The list goes on and on. By the way, executive pay at Fannie Mae was a well-kept secret, and the company successfully blocked some in Congress, such as Representative Richard Baker of Louisiana, from receiving information about salaries and bonuses paid by the company. It was only after Fannie was caught cooking its books that details of its lavish pay came out. The accounting fraud at Fannie went undiscovered until 2005, when an investigation by OFHEO unearthed it. In a voluminous, intensely detailed 2006 report, OFHEO noted that if Fannie Mae had used the appropriate accounting methods in 1998, the company's performance would have generated no executive bonuses at all. Though a highly kept secret at the time, Johnson's bonus for 1998 was $1.9 million. Investigators returned. It later emerged that the company had made inaccurate disclosures when it said Johnson earned a total of almost $7 million in 1998. In actuality, his total compensation that year was more like $21 million. And none of these people, to my knowledge, has ever been punished, ever. So it's one of the great scandals of our time. It's one of the great scandals of our time, what has happened. What steps were taken by Congress at that time to punish Fannie Mae? None. According to published report, including Fannie Mae's own news release, Daniel Mudd, the president and CEO of Fannie Mae at the time, was awarded over $14.4 million in 2006 and over $12.2 million in 2007 in salary bonuses and stock. And Fannie Mae continued their risky behavior, successfully posting profits of $4.1 billion in 2006. Well, I fully understand that the corrupt individuals who cooked the books in order to meet the targets necessary for maximum executive compensation are no longer in place at Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. For all that, we can be thankful. But let's be clear about one thing. The structure for executive bonuses remains in place. There's still an incentives for executives at Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac to meet certain goals in order to be rewarded with millions of dollars in bonuses. I'm not suggesting that either one of these GSEs is using fraudulent accounting methods, but the taxpayer remains at risk if an unscrupulous individual or group of individuals decides to put their own self-interests above that of the American people. It happened at Fannie and Freddie before, and it can happen again, and it's unconscionable. It's been proven time and time again that Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac are synonymous with mismanagement, waste, outright corruption, and fraud, and their federal regulator had the audacity to approve $12.8 million in executive bonuses to people who make $900,000 a year. This body should be ashamed if we let this happen again, especially in these tough economic times. Every day, more and more Americans are losing their jobs and their homes, and we're allowing these people to take home annual salaries of $900,000 and bonuses of $12.8 million, all while they ask the taxpayers for $6 billion more in bailout money. Many of my colleagues sent a letter to Edward DeMarco, the acting director of the FHFA, asking for an explanation for his decision to award millions in bonuses to executives at Fannie and Freddie. In his response, Mr. DeMarco echoed what is becoming an increasingly popular theme used to defend the big payouts. Essentially, Mr. DeMarco argues that in order to get the best people in place, we need to pay them outrageous amounts of taxpayer dollars. I don't buy that argument. It's ridiculous to tell the American taxpayer, look, we lost hundreds of billions of your money, so we need to pay these smart guys millions of dollars of your money so that we don't lose the rest of your money. The American people are smart enough to see through that sham logic, and they are angry. As I previously stated on the Senate floor, I find it hard to believe that we can't find talented people with the skills necessary to manage Fannie and Freddie for good money, $900,000, without the incentive of multi-million-dollar bonuses. There are many examples of intelligent, well-qualified, patriotic individuals working in our federal government who make significantly less than the top executives at Fannie and Freddie with just as much responsibility. For example, the basic pay for a four-star general is $179,700. Including basic allowance for housing, that figure rises to $214,980. Chief Justice Roberts makes $223,500 a year, and President's cabinet members make $199,700 a year. Now today, Mr. President, to add a little insult to injury, or a lot of insult to injury, here's today's story from NPR. Freddie Mac, the taxpayer-owned mortgage giant, has placed multi-billion-dollar bets that pay off if homeowners stay trapped in expensive mortgages with interest rates well above current rates. Now, this is the same outfit that we're paying all this money to in these bonuses, so they decided to bet against the homeowners of America. Freddie began increasing these bets dramatically in late 2010, the same time that the company was making it harder for homeowners to get out of such high-interest mortgages. No evidence has emerged that these decisions were coordinated. The company is a key gatekeeper for home loans, but says its traders are, quote, walled off from the officials who have restricted homeowners from taking advantage of historically low interest rates by imposing higher fees and new rules. Freddie's charter calls for the company to make home loans more accessible. Its chief executive, Charles Haldeman, Jr., recently told Congress that his company is, quote, helping financially strapped families reduce their mortgage costs through refinancing their mortgages. But the trades uncovered for the first time in an investigation by ProPublica and by NPR, give Freddie a powerful incentive to do the opposite, highlighting a conflict of interest at the heart of the company. Do we really need this company around? Can't we find something better? In addition to being an instrument of government policy dedicated to making home loans more accessible, Freddie also has giant investment portfolios and could lose substantial amounts of money if too many borrowers refinance. Freddie Mac's trades, while perfectly legal, come during a period when the company was supposed to be reducing its investment portfolio according to the terms of its government takeover agreement. But these trades escalate the risk of its portfolio because the securities Freddie has purchased are volatile and hard to sell, mortgage security experts say. The financial crisis in 2008 was made worse when Wall Street traders made bets against their customers and the American people. Now some see similar behavior, only this time by traders at a government-owned company who are using leverage which increases the potential profits, but also the risk of big losses and other Wall Street stratagems. More than 3 years into the government takeover, we have Freddie Mac pursuing highly levered, complicated transactions, seemingly with the purpose of trading against homeowners, says Mayer. These are the kinds of things that got us into trouble in the first place. Mr. President, you can't make it up. So it seems to me that the first thing we ought to do, as I and others have recommended, is get these GSEs on the track to going out of business as quickly as possible. Their track record is outrageous. And the second thing, let's not give millions of dollars in bonuses to people that are betting against the homeowners of America. Mr. President, I yield the floor.